It starts as a completely ordinary day. In one school, students in a Friday afternoon calculus class sit back and kill time by playing online trivia quizzes. In another, an IT intern sits alone in a quiet, messy basement office, eating his lunch. Then, at a different middle school during a raining lunch period, the routine is shattered. 4 loud, booming sounds echo sharply across the campus. The students waiting in line for food don't dive for cover. Instead, they look at the overcast sky and assume it is thunder. They casually dismiss the noise, even as campus security guards rush into the cafeteria, yelling at everyone to take shelter. This diagram illustrates a psychological phenomenon known as normalcy bias. Notice how these massive, jagged threat signals enter the brain, but instead of triggering an alarm, a cognitive filter forces them into smooth, harmless shapes. The brain is hardwired to minimize sudden threats by forcing them to fit a familiar, non-threatening pattern. This wiring is persistent. In one neighborhood, residents watched a man cutting his own arm and writing a death threat on his front window in blood. Because it was late October, they rationalized the display as an elaborate Halloween decoration. This biological preference for the familiar creates a lag in response. By the time the brain can no longer ignore the evidence, the window to prepare for the emergency has often already narrowed. To break that cycle, the brain requires an undeniable sensory anomaly, something so abrupt that it shatters the illusion of safety. Back in that calculus class, the students hit that exact breaking point. Their laid-back teacher suddenly began rushing around the room in a panic. Seconds later, the frantic voice of the dean echoed over the intercom, explicitly telling the teachers that this was not a drill and to initiate an immediate lockdown. The physical environment changed rapidly. The teacher shut off the lights and the school cut the main power. The low, familiar humming of the electrical panel in the back of the classroom ceased, leaving the students sitting in total, isolated silence. Look at this data visualization tracking sensory processing under extreme stress. As the blue visual input line drops to 0 in darkness, the brain compensates. The red auditory sensitivity line spikes into the red zone, pushing the nervous system into hyper-awareness. With their hearing dialed to the maximum, the psychological terror intensified. Down the dark hallway, they could hear a man screaming death threats, violently slamming his fists against the metal lockers as his footsteps moved closer and closer to their door. While this sensory shock ends the initial denial, the sudden intensity forces the body into physiological overload, setting the stage for a secondary reaction. When the brain is hit with too much sensory input during a crisis, it often defaults to the freeze response, a state of physical paralysis. We see this paralysis in the case of the IT intern. After the school was placed on lockdown, he hid under a desk in a dark basement office that didn't even have a lock on the door. Trapped in the quiet darkness, the tension amplified with every sound. The heavy basement door let out a long, agonizing creak, followed by slow, heavy footsteps descending the stairs and walking directly into his office. He held his breath, terrified that any noise would give him away. Out of nowhere, a hand reached down in the dark, grabbed his shoulder, and pulled him up from under the desk. Confronted by an intruder, the intern's brain was still fighting the shock of the freeze response. Rather than fight or flee, his mind instinctively tried to establish an alliance with the person holding him. The man whispered that everything was okay, claiming he was just a parent who had been told to hide from the danger upstairs. The intern's brain, looking for any way to lower the stress of the moment, wanted to believe it. During a freeze response, the brain is highly susceptible to accepting any narrative that promises safety, even if delivered by the primary threat. The trance of the freeze response was broken by another sensory interruption. A loud ding from the intern's cell phone pierced the silence of the basement. He looked down at the bright screen. It was an urgent text from his coworker upstairs. "Dude, this is crazy. Some guy with a gun shot Mr. Buckley. He's wearing a red shirt and hat. Whatever you do, don't come upstairs." In that moment, the intern engaged the antidote to normalcy bias, situational awareness. He began actively processing the data in his immediate environment. This logic matrix demonstrates the alignment of 2 distinct data points. The intern looked from the phone to the man in the red shirt, and the text message's description converged with the physical reality of the stranger. With the truth undeniable, the freeze response broke. The intern overrode his fear, abandoned the false safety, and sprinted for the stairs. As he scrambled up the concrete steps, the man in the red shirt fired. A gunshot echoed, the bullet ricocheting off a metal pipe in the darkness, narrowly missing him as he escaped through the doors to the waiting police. Survival in an active threat scenario requires forcing yourself to see the world as it is, not as you want it to be. By trusting raw sensory data and utilizing situational awareness, you can accept a terrifying reality in time to fight for your life.